Well, welcome back to the fireside, and a very special welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. We're really delighted that you've all come to share with us today. My name is Susan Prescott. I'm Director of the Nova Network, and before we get started, I want to begin with our customary acknowledgement that celebrates the spirit of all people, places and planet. And as we come from many places and many traditions, I wish to acknowledge and celebrate all wisdom, past, present and emerging, and the spirit of the earth that sustains all of us with great love, gratitude and respect. Thank you. These campfires are wonderful opportunities to share ideas on a variety of topics, to build connectivity and community, and to find opportunities in the challenges as we seek better ways of being and doing. This event is a special collaboration with the Planetary Health Alliance and the Garrison Institute, and I really want to thank Sam Myers, Director of the PHA, Jonathan Rose, Chairman of the Garrison Institute, and Stephen Posner, Director of Pathways to Planetary Health at Garrison, for their vision in addressing deeper values as a critical part of meaningful change, and in the power of connecting communities like ours with resonant purpose to magnify the importance of including these deeper spiritual approaches. And as always, we're really grateful to the Nova Institute for hosting these activities. So I would like to invite the President of the Nova Institute, Brian Berman, to add a few words of welcome. Over to Brian.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Berman, the President and founder of the Nova Institute for Health. The Nova Institute is a heart-centered think tank that takes action for the good of people, places, and the planet. One of our main strategies is to facilitate forums like this one, where we can talk about important issues, connect with others, and discover solutions that move us forward. Thank you, Susan, for gathering us today to discuss such an important topic. For more than 3 decades, I've focused on the evidence-based practice of whole person care. And along the way, I've seen a lot of focus on fixing the body and treating disease. But for humans to truly thrive, we must nourish our inner development. This includes examining such things as spirituality, creativity, and purpose, not just our physical being, things we too often don't talk about. That is what makes us truly human, and it's that heart in our heart-centered mission here at Nova. So, thank you to all of our presenters today, and to all of you for being here. I'm excited to be on this journey with all of you to explore our inner dimension, which is so crucial to flourishing and to being part of a movement for change. And as they say, you can't do the outer work if you aren't doing the inner work. And in the words of Edgar Cayce, the spirit is the life, the mind is the builder, and the physical is the result. So during today's campfire, the presentations, and I hope the ensuing discussion, will explore these threads. Please also join us for ongoing sharing and discussion through our Nova Integration Hub at hub.novainstituteforhealth.org. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Brian. And to help us come into a more connected, balanced head and heart space, Rick Scott will lead us through a mindful moment. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Susan. So let's begin by finding a comfortable position and just take a moment to calm your body and your mind. Take a few relaxing breaths. And if you would like to, gently close your eyes or allow your gaze to soften. And bring your attention to the fact that you are breathing and becoming aware of the movement of your breath as it enters your body and as it leaves your body. No need to change your breathing in any way. And as we sit in silence for the next few moments, just give full attention and full care to each in-breath and to each out-breath as they flow, one after the other, in a never-ending, life-giving cycle. And if thoughts come and let them go. And just allow yourself to be fully present in this moment. And when you are ready, return your attention to this space and gently open your eyes, feeling relaxed and refreshed. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Rick, for that. Now, just to overview our schedule today, I'm going to kick off the panel with my 5-minute intro to frame the topic, and then our panelist speakers will each share their perspectives for around 5 minutes each. And this will be followed by discussion, which is the most important part because we know there are many others on the call with important perspectives. And to ensure that we have plenty of time, I'm going to ask the panelists to try and keep to time. And if anyone goes over 6 minutes, we might have to ring a bell. So now we're going to kick off with my introduction. This gathering is intended to send a very strong signal that deeper exploration of the human condition must be central in our quest for solutions from the personal to the planetary scale. It's been said that almost all of our problems in the world today come from within, from the human attitudes, values and behaviours that define our increasingly unhealthy relationship with ourselves, others and the natural world. As noted by Gus Speth, former chair to the UN SDG group, the top environmental problems are selfishness, greed and apathy, and to deal with these we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. This calls for solutions that promote awareness, wisdom and connectedness, for a paradigm shift towards more mutualistic worldviews and a higher level of planetary consciousness. In most societies, there's been a progressive shift towards extrinsic life goals such as material wealth, power, fame and status at the expense of intrinsic goals such as personal growth, learning, loving, giving and caring for others, especially with increasing technology. Jean Twenge and others have shown that this is associated with major social trends towards greed, narcissism, antisocial behaviour, unhappiness, mental ill health, disconnection from nature, with increasingly exploitative and extractive attitudes. Decades of work by Richard Ryan and others shows that achieving extrinsic goals does not increase happiness and only leads to an unfulfilling cycle of wanting. Happiness and meaning in life depend on intrinsic goals, which are both necessary and sufficient in scientific terms. And that is true across ages and cultures. It's also associated with better physical, mental, and emotional health and increases in the elusive but critical life essence or energy that we call vitality, which appears essential to human flourishing. There are also collective benefits such as altruism, prosocial and pro-environmental attitudes, so encouraging intrinsic values is a clear path to not only enhancing personal growth and well-being, but to also build more prosocial communities inspired towards collaborative action in the interests of people, places and planet. This requires a greater focus on connectedness and relationships, and psychological models such as self-determination theory for meaning of life focus on connection to self and connection to others through both relatedness and social contributions. And for our purposes, we might extend that to include our connections with the natural world. However, we also need to move beyond these intellectual compartmentalised models towards deeper experience of connectedness, a more universal sense of being part of all things, of feeling the awe, the wonder, the love for the universe around us and within us. And from that deeper, wiser, inspired vantage point, we can approach all of our challenges from a very different perspective. This means making the journey that is sometimes difficult for academics from our heads to our hearts to bring our whole selves, hearts and minds, to address our challenges. And that is why nature, spiritual practices, storytelling, arts and other creative practices are so important for helping us open that door. As a paediatrician, I want to underscore the importance of nurturing emotional intelligence, creativity, and connection to nature from an early age when the scene is set for our future health, attitudes, and behaviours. And as noted in this paper, children are hungry for mystery and they're wired for awe. So encouraging this is important for more generous, connected communities. Perhaps one of the greatest moments of awe for all humanity was when we saw our home from space in 1968. This remarkable outward journey had the even more profound effect of turning awareness inward to our own condition and that of our troubled planet. It contributed to an emerging social and spiritual movement that inspired the first Earth Day, calling for peace, unity, love and justice. Unfortunately, since then, we've drifted away from this spiritual call and become more focused on intellectual and technical solutions, often driven by self-interest and exploitation. But now we're beginning to remember that our broken relationships are not just an intellectual problem. And despite the chaos and confusion in the world today, perhaps even because of it, there is a growing desire for spiritual reawakening and reconnection. Which brings us back to where we need to begin. To really widen our vision and feel truly connected, we must look within. Change starts at home, and that means we need to be in harmony with ourselves as a starting point. The big question for all of us is, what do we do? And my personal offering to that question is that we should not underestimate the power of kindness in our doing and in our being. Kindness for every person, everything, and especially to ourselves. Kindness builds connectedness, meaning and purpose. It encourages, even requires us to look within and brings us to a place of meaningful service to something greater. If we look at people for who they really are, without exception, then that will help each of us know who we really are. Kindness is powerful, it's contagious, and we need a lot more of it in the world today. So having conversations like this is key to normalising academic discussions about love and meaningful connections as part of the solutions. And all of our panellists will weave their thoughts into this narrative. Each will speak for 5 minutes, and I don't want to detract from their time by reading their bios, so I urge you to read more about them at the link we'll put in the chat. So now I'd like to pass the mic to Rutendo, who will invite all of us to remember our own indigeneity and connectedness to Mother Earth. Thanks, Rutendo.
Thank you so much, Susan. And it's such a privilege to be here around this fire, this campfire. And today I'd like to tell 2 stories. And the first story is the story of a cyclone. Now, Cyclone Idai 4 years ago was one of the worst tropical cyclones on record to affect Africa and the Southern Hemisphere. This long-lived storm caused catastrophic damage and humanitarian crises in Madagascar, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, killing almost 1,600 people and being recorded as the deadliest tropical cyclone recorded in the Southern Hemisphere, which includes Australia, the South Pacific, and South Atlantic basins. Idai, as it was called, was ranked as the 2nd deadliest tropical cyclone on record. This cyclone caused severe flooding in the region. More than 3 million people experienced the direct effects of the cyclones, with hundreds of thousands in need of assistance. Infrastructural damage from Idai totaled at least $1 billion. And along with that, we had all sorts of diseases, including sexual exploitation, diseases, and women and children being most effective, especially through the different violences that took place, direct and more subtle structural and cultural violences. Now, why do I talk about this cyclone? What is very interesting is that in the random naming of the cyclone, it was given the name Idai, which in Shona is an injunction to love. It is an order, it is a command to love. Love is not just a fanciful emotion, according to our Indigenous knowledge systems. And love, from an African perspective, is a cosmology. Love is a philosophy. Love is a methodology. Love is a task. Cyclone Idai, the 2nd deadliest tropical cyclone on record, was a wake-up call to love. The second story I'd like to talk about is the Niger. Now, the Niger is a river in West Africa, and it arises in the Guinea Highlands, a mere 240 kilometers from the Atlantic Ocean. Yet, instead of following the course of commonly understood logic by traveling those 240 kilometers to the ocean, it instead moves inward towards the desert, deep into the Sahara Desert in Mali. And once in the desert, instead of following this course towards the Mediterranean Sea, it makes a surprising right turn near the city of Timbuktu, following a meandering journey through Niger, Benin, and Nigeria, and eventually discharging into the Atlantic Ocean at the Gulf of Guinea. What should have been, according to modern science, a 240-kilometer journey from the highlands of the Guinea Highlands to the Atlantic Ocean instead became a sinuous crescent-shaped 4,180 kilometers of river. And as a consequence of this inefficient route, the Niger loses 2/3 of its potential flow to seepage and evaporation. And because the gradient drastically decreases, it reduces its flow potential, and thus it becomes slow, it becomes sluggish in its trek towards the ocean. But the loss of this potential is the formation of the Niger Delta, a series of braided streams, a series of marshes, and a series of lakes as large as Belgium. The Niger Delta is the largest wetland in Africa and the third largest in the world, with an ecosystem containing one of the highest concentrations of biodiversity on the planet. And apart from supporting abundant rainforest flora and fauna, it has large stretches of arable land that sustains diverse agricultural systems. It is home to more than 30 million people, made up of more than 40 different ethnic groups. So this delta is a result of an inefficient river, but this inefficiency breeds effectiveness. It is effective in bringing life. It is effective in bringing a wellspring of diversity and nourishment. And tragically, this diversity could soon be destroyed due to extensive dam construction, poisoning of the waters due to oil spills, and thus this abundant biodiverse delta is gradually becoming sustained to ecocide. Now, why do I tell these two stories? The tales of Cyclone Idai and the tale of the Niger River are the tales of our indigenous knowledge systems or ancient wisdoms. They're the tales of our ways of knowing and our ways of doing and our ways of sustaining. They're the tales of ways that have roots in our communities, but are situated within a broader social context in which all life forms are the result between our social and spiritual relations. These two stories are the tales of knowledge that is transmitted orally, through initiation, through demonstration, through observation. They are tales of experiential knowledge rather than theoretical. They are tales of knowledge that is inherently interlinked to the understanding of the environment. They are tales of knowledge that is dynamic, constantly adapting, that is regenerative, and that is ecological. And these are our indigenous knowledge systems, which are knowledges of both plurality and singularity. Now, these ways of knowing are those that bring together a web of interconnectedness, interrelatedness, interdependence, which, according to our indigenous African perspectives, is known as the cosmic truth of Ma'at, or Ubuntu, the interconnectedness, the interrelatedness of all that is, the interrelatedness between reasoned beings or persons, those of sound, the interrelatedness between those that are not reasoned, between things, the interrelatedness between time and space, the interrelatedness between the tangible and the intangible, that which reminds us that all is related through singularity, the dynamic, causative life force that we call Ntu. So this knowledge of ours is a knowledge and a method that listens to the rhythm of the oceans, that listens to the language of the rivers, that listens to the codes of the mountains, the breath of the wind, the words of the birds, the silent steps of the elephant, the branches of the forest. It brings us into dominion and not domination. It brings us into communion and not contamination. It brings us into harmony and resonance with the essence of life. It is that which is the language of nature. It is that which is carried by the feminine, who have the inherent genetic coding of nature. And when we follow this way of neter or nature, we're then able to find possibilities for creativity and innovation. We're able to find possibilities for mitigation and transformation. We're able to find possibilities for healing and restoration. This is Niger, the inefficient yet effective route. And this is Idai, the injunction, the cosmology, the methodology to love. I thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rutendo. That is so beautiful. And thank you for sharing these stories of deeper awareness and experiential connectivity for all of us. Now we have a slight change in the order of our panel as Sam Myers has to leave on the hour. Sam is a truly wonderful person and leader of the Planetary Health Alliance, and our network has been a long-time member of the Alliance. So we're thrilled to be collaborating with them for this meeting. He's going to say a few words about the Constellation Project and whatever else comes to mind and heart. And he began that project, of course, with Terry Tempest Williams. So Sam, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Really nice to be with everybody today. Really appreciated, Susan, your remarks and Rutendo's as well, and feel like quite a neophyte in your company. So I have nothing so beautiful and articulate prepared for this conversation, and I don't think I'll use my 5 minutes, but I will say that, you know, as a physician and a scientist, I come to this conversation about spirituality reluctantly. I started from a perspective of trying to understand the scientific connections between the state of our planet's natural systems and human health, and recognizing that potentially the majority of the global burden of disease over the next century is going to be driven by our own transformation of our planet's natural systems. And from a purely pragmatic perspective of thinking about how we're going to safeguard human health and the rest of life on Earth into the future, we need to rethink the way we're living in order to protect and regenerate our natural life support systems. As I thought more and more about the Earth crisis and the global health crisis that the Earth crisis is now precipitating, I started to wonder whether there wasn't sort of a deeper crisis, and in some ways a crisis of the stories that we tell ourselves about our relationship to nature and to each other. And Terry and I have been talking about that sort of topic for several years over cups of tea, and that was really the genesis of this Constellation project, which was to ask whether these sort of broken stories that really emphasize human exceptionalism and our separateness from the natural world, and also this sort of privileged position of a very few of us over other species, but also over other human beings, and particularly over future generations, and that we have sort of claimed this privileged position that we really have no right to. And so I got thinking about human exceptionalism and where that came from, and the need for different stories. And so Terry and I have been sort of thinking about this idea of what are the other stories that describe a different relationship between us and the natural world, and describe the kind of caregiving that Susan was talking about across geographies and generations. And can we begin to bring other voices and sort of throw these new stories from faith traditions, from Indigenous peoples, from the arts and humanities up into, you know, the night sky to illuminate a different way of thinking about those relationships. And so that's really where we've come from. One of the things that's happened recently that I'm very excited about, I had the honor of speaking at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues in April in New York, and it was at the release of a new report on Indigenous determinants of health. And I think this report is really important. It's a sort of collaborative report. It represented at least 5 of the 7 eco-regions with Indigenous peoples from around the world contributing. They spent a year writing this report. And it sounds a lot like what Rotendo was just describing. There's a heavy emphasis on interdependence and mutualism, a renunciation of human exceptionalism. And the first paragraph opens with a statement that the health of the land and the health of the peoples are synonymous, which I really loved. And I also think is sort of a fascinating convergence between the planetary health science that I've been engaged in, which is really looking at how those dots connect between environmental change and human health, and these millennia-old traditions from different indigenous peoples from all over the world, all kind of coming to the same place, which is this interdependence on our natural systems. So how do we create the news stories that emphasize the kind of values that Susan was talking about in her opening, and how can we as a community here help to curate some of those stories and share them with each other over time? So that's what I've been thinking about, and again, honored to be in this company, and look forward to hearing everybody else's thoughts. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sam, and to Terry too, who's also on the call. It was so inspiring to see the PHA emphasising the importance of narratives, creativity, spirituality in the planetary health agenda, and the Constellation Project is a wonderful forum for that. Now we're going to go to Christine Wamsler, who is globally recognised for her work in connecting personal inner development to collective and systems change.
Thank you. To answer how inner personal development contributes to collective and system change, we need to get to the bottom of three key aspects. These are the nature of our current sustainability crisis, the nature of complex systems involved, and the associated mind sustainability nexus. Let's start with the first aspect, the nature of our current sustainability crisis. In contrast to mainstream thinking, we are increasingly understanding that sustainability crises, such as climate change, have one common denominator or root cause. They are a reflection of an inner human crisis of disconnection or separation from self, others, and nature that is grounded in our modern society's social paradigm. This paradigm is based on the understanding that our thinking mind is separate from our feelings and bodily emotions, that we are all separate from each other, that some humans are superior to others, and that we humans are separate and superior to the rest of the natural world. Addressing sustainability crisis thus requires a shift away from such exploitative paradigms to more relational, regenerative mindsets. So it's about becoming a more caring society instead of relentlessly and increasingly exhausting ourselves, others, and the planet. This brings us to the second key aspect, since this change involves engaging in complex systems, both individually and collectively. And this is challenging because complex systems are fundamentally different from machines. They emerge. They undergo a self-organization process that ultimately shapes the state they are in. And this state derives from the relationship patterns within the system. So consequently, system transformation is about changing relationship patterns and addressing inner dimensions that influence these relationships. Addressing such inner dimensions thus requires an in-depth understanding of the mind sustainability nexus, which brings us to the third key aspect. In short, my research shows that we can divide the intersection of mind and today's sustainability crisis into three categories. Our minds are a victim of related impacts, a barrier to adequate action, and, as mentioned previously, a key driver or root cause of sustainability crisis. The net result is a vicious cycle of deteriorating individual, collective, and planetary well-being. Put together, the presented three key aspects provide an understanding of how inner and outer change are co-created. They show our potential and agency to support change and that tapping into this potential is about supporting capacities and conditions for reconnection. Such capacities are called transformative capacities or inner development goals that have been identified in emergent research. In simple terms, there are three key capacities. It's about relational being, relational thinking, and relational acting. A vast range of more specific qualities and skills is available to support them, and they are to some extent individual and context specific, as are the methods that can support them. The Inner Development Goals framework is a communication tool that is aimed to advocate transformative capacities for sustainability. Theoretically, these capacities are reflected in the so-called inner-outer transformation model, which we recently developed. And this model shows that transformative capacities and associated intermediary factors, such as well-being, influence sustainability because they relate to certain worldviews, beliefs, and values that delineate our connections or relationships with ourselves, others, and nature. The model also indicates that there are three complementary ways to support such change across individual, collective, and system levels. At individual level, it involves implementing measures like education, training, and coaching that can help a person to tap into their inner potential to support change. Measures at the collective or group level aim to support related learning environments to create a culture of growth and nourish fields of change. Finally, measures at the system level aim to support policy integration in order to systematically mainstream the consideration of transformative capacities and intrinsic values into existing institutional and policy systems. So to sum up, the presented three key aspects show that inner personal development is intrinsically entangled with collective and systems change. Thank you.
Very special thanks to Christine, and these videos will be up on the conference website afterwards, so you'll be able to immerse yourself in more detail again. So next we have Una Tellhed, staying in Sweden, who will talk more about her research on tools such as loving kindness meditation for nurturing more altruistic societies. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Una Tellhed, and I'm an associate professor of psychology at Lund University in Sweden. And today I will tell you about a study where we showed that a brief session of loving kindness meditation increased students' willingness to help others and do good for society in their future careers. And these types of prosocial goals are called communal career goals. And in theory, they are contrasted with agentic career goals, which involve striving for money and status. And communion and agency, they are considered the core dimensions in human psychology, and they can be boiled down to having a focus on others versus having a focus on oneself. And they are connected to career interest, such that people that have strong communal career goals are more likely to be interested in occupations where helping others is salient, such as working in healthcare, for example. And as Susan Prescott stated earlier, researchers have described that the Western world is becoming increasingly focused on agentic values, that is money and status, and perhaps at the expense of communal values. And relatedly, in one study, we could show that 70% of boys in Sweden prefer to fulfill agentic goals in their future career over communal career goals. And for women, young women, it was 50-50. And I think most of us here are agree that raising communal career goals could be a good idea since they are pro-social in nature. And interestingly, when I searched the literature, I could not find any experimental studies which has shown how communal career goals can be raised. And while I was contemplating this, I was involved in a research project that investigated health benefits of yoga. And so I was trying out many different meditation techniques, including loving kindness meditation. And this technique was originally developed within Buddhism, and it aims to promote loving acceptance and kindness towards all beings. In the meditation, you are mindfully envisioning spreading feelings of caring and understanding to yourself, to your loved ones, to strangers, and also to people that you have interpersonal difficulties with. So you're spreading the love. And when I was trying this meditation, I found it very emotionally important, and I had the idea that perhaps it can increase communal career goals. So in collaboration with my students, I designed 3 experiments, and we recruited 400 high school students and 125 social science university students to the studies. And we randomized them to conditions. And in one condition, they listened to a loving kindness meditation. It was only 12 minutes. And after that, they filled out a survey that included career goals. And to avoid demand effects, we falsely told the participants that they took part in 2 studies. One that was concerning the effect of meditation on stress, and one that was concerning career goals. And to test for placebo effects, we also compared the results with a group that listened to calming music. And the results show that for the high school students, the meditation group rated significantly higher on communal career goals than the other groups, the control groups and the music groups. That is, they rated greater willingness to striving for helping others and benefiting society in their future career, as opposed to people who did not meditate for 12 minutes. We could not replicate the results in a sample of university students that you see here in the middle. And this could be because they have already chosen a career path, so they could be more set in their goals. And you could also see that their communal career goals were very high, as would be expected for social science students. So what can we learn from this study? I think it is promising that such a brief session of loving kindness meditation can increase the willingness to help others in young people. And it suggests that we can learn to become more prosocial. And other research has found that loving kindness meditation promotes empathy, which could be the explanation for why they were willing to help others more afterwards. And so it could be a promising tool to use, for example, in education. But of course, we must remember that some people are opposed to meditating, for example, for religious reasons. So it should, of course, be voluntary. I forgot to state the reference here, so I will share the article in the chat so you can read it if you like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Una. And I think that mindful approaches in education and in fact all aspects of life could have major effects on society. So really important work. Now please welcome Sonali, who's going to talk about mindful movement building, how we might nurture new ideas towards a tipping point for social change. So please welcome Sonali.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So good to be here. I'm coming in from Portland, Oregon, the lands of Multnomah, Klickitat, Siletz, and other First Nations. And I'm here as the founder of Our Bodhi Project and SOMA, which is a spiritual, social, medicinal apothecary. Coming in as moving into wisdom tender spaces, studying mystical Hinduism and Buddhism, an organizer, a health practitioner, and someone who works deeply around justices. So we'll go ahead and start a brief presentation. And the first 3 slides are really just grounding a bit in when we say connectivity and how that moves with intentional movement building, grounding a bit in the reality of the interconnectedness, which we've heard already today from Rutendo and the other speakers. So really sitting with connectivity as the skin of the thing. So taking these first slides to ground again in relationship and relationality and providing a few examples around that. So this inseparable reality as the condition, the causes, the outcomes for planetary health. And learning from my sister Pat of the Dene tribe here in Turtle Island, thinking about profound relationship as ceremony itself. So per slide, I want to elevate a few interesting movements that are that we're a part of, me and my team, and so many others. For this one, embodying we are the earth is who we are extensions of the earth as an indigenous and earth and cosmos-based principle. There are soil ecologists and soil warriors and protectors and farmers joining right now to think about how to intentionally, mindfully, grounding in the spirit of soil, move forward to address planetary health and the inequities and the injustices. So moving into a relational, undetermined space to think about how to address the very things that the Anthropocene has set forward. So what does it mean to really ground in the relational movements of life? These three pictures, Timothy Dykes photographed the fern, Kevin Burgeon photographed the snail, and Rose Miller, this beautiful succulent. How do we really think about, as we're moving from this deeper relationality into form, spirit into form, what are these worldviews, the practices and knowledges that really ground in the languages and realities of this more than human web that we're a part of? So some of the qualities we might see are the micro macro, thinking of scale, and movements, including the ones like Constellation Project and others, embodying practices that ground in living organisms. And what does that look like? Living organisms' lives and how we move. How do we practice these ways of knowing and being, and really look at the life force in all forms, as Rotendo talked about, and I think others have talked about the vitality, the vital force, and the non-binary. So looking here, there are movements now coming across land return projects, farmers, health practitioners, activists, and artists holding these spaces, trying to understand where have we embodied the Anthropocene in logic and culture and practice, and having frank conversations around that and creating retreat spaces for us to unfold, deconstruct, and move forward with emerging narratives. Another frame here, this one is being used in US government spaces and local and national governments, looking at another living organism we're very familiar with, the frame of the human body, and seeing that change goes beyond the skeletal. So using this as a way to say, what are we rewarded to see as change? So policy shifts, moving of budget and monies are often very much seen as the deep forms of success in movement building. But how do we think about our nervous systems? What's the heart of the matter? How do we ground in our Indigenous practices and worldviews? So I'm trying to elevate that intentional movement building also happens via the knowledges, the maps, the creative practices, the anatomies, as we move forward. And as we think about what Sam had said, it goes beyond fixing the body and really looking at something much more holistic. So again, showing you just a couple of these movements that are happening right now. And we're looking at, through our apothecary and through our project, what are the medicines of our time, of our relational anatomies, these antidotes to the anti-life project of modernity and our conditioning into it. So thinking about the loving kindness work, for instance, how do these practices help us view our conditioning, see it, unfold it, and see it as more porous? And seeing that, you know, the practices that are very liberatory, how can they help us see this expanded reality and that it's possible? How important that is. So I wanted to share just a few elements here of different sorts of movements that we're watching nationally and internationally that are grounding in the living organisms approaches based in the ancient wisdoms from so many cultures around the world. So oriented towards collective ways of being, non-binary, flourishing with the radical diversity and plurality of life, learned and lived, so the somatic practices that we're hearing about, moving intentionally around inclusivity. And watching in that sort of first loop of the Anthropocene sort of emerging from Deborah Freeze and Margaret Wheatley's work, where we depend on institutional or professional definitions for living organisms approaches do not move in that way, and where we might want to question the assumptions around the need for dominant norms and narratives. So in this work of the spiritual, social, medicinal apothecary, we're really grounding in protecting those who care for are moved by the wisdoms, are moving with the wisdoms of plants and animals and other realities for right relations. So highlighting the work of the Nursing for Planetary Health movement briefly here, this is just their sketch. I wanted to put something up that is unfinished, that is very artistic in nature. This is their sketch of the two loops theory by Deborah Fries and Margaret Wheatley, of the first loop being that of the Anthropocene and capitalism and all of these forces we've already talked about as it's moving into palliative care and composting. And there's a second loop emerging of multiple little loops of the emergent narratives. And it's the gap in between that we're looking at. In an intentional movement building, how do we embody the practices to allow us to view, notice, deconstruct those logics of the first loop and move into the second? So the Nursing for Planetary Health folks are connecting through these meaningful practices and moving in a way to bring forward of values of code and ethics for nurses around the world, and as a sample, as an example, for many other sectors to follow. And they're failing forward, and they're moving forward with such love, deep grounding in eros and the erotic in all life forms, and a keen eye on what structural changes will help the deconstruction that's happening and move us into more stabilizing emerging narratives. And all the while, our Indigenous theories, practices, and realities are moving in that wave, consistently revitalizing. So I think I'll just move from this, just because for time, to share one key example of how the nurses are moving with the planetary health education framework in their work. So with this interconnection within nature as a key domain, they're using the arts as a way of languaging how they're viewing the nurses, reorienting of their roles in the current systems, but also what's emerging, grounded in the ancient wisdoms of the spirit of nursing. And so through using images, it's supporting the core team of these incredible nurses and nurse scholars to reorient their thinking and to really allow to emerge the values and code of ethics that are really aligned with the rhythm of planetary health and consciousness. So wanted to mention that, and then just move in closing to an art piece that was offered to us from an amazing artist around the spirit that's necessary and required that connects us. And these images are being used to fuel our movements towards greater mindfulness, intentionality, and sustainability in a spiritual and political way. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sonali, and that really reinforces the importance of these artistic and collaborative narratives in promoting change. Thank you. Next, we have Cecilia Magnosa, who will share a wonderful example of how creative narrative can connect and inspire communities to action.
Thank you, Susan, and hello, everyone, and already very inspired by what's been shared and a lot to think about. So thank you again, Susan, for the generous invitation to be a part of this conversation. My name is Cecilia Magnosa Niblon. I'm an anthropologist, archaeologist, and educator by background, and lead for the University of Exeter One Chance Left poems for COP26, and We Still Have a Chance climate stories for COP27. I'd like to invite you to watch a short 2-minute presentation inspired by our COP27 climate stories to help us imagine new possibilities. Let me screen share. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Sorry about that. Sorry. Let me just move to the next slide. Driven by hope for a sustainable, equitable, and beautiful world, in 2020, I brought together an interdisciplinary team of colleagues from science, health, and the arts to intervene in our planetary health emergency. Despite having known of the climate crisis for decades and possessing ever-growing mountains of data, demonstrating its severity, the scale of action necessary to properly address it is still not being taken. The climate crisis is also a crisis of empathy, language, communication, and translation. At the University of Exeter, we have pioneered a new way of communicating climate science that really engages people intellectually and emotionally. Our purpose is to use the platform of COP and other fora to communicate new climate narratives linking science, health, arts, education, and humanities, and to build strategic partnerships to fill the drive to respond to the call to action among children, young people, policymakers, and the public. So why stories? Stories is the way we make sense of the world, and we heard quite a bit already about how powerful this is. Stories help us empathize. As Brian Eno says, stories matter. They can trap us, but they can also inspire us. The stories we tell shape how we see ourselves and how we see the world. When we see the world differently, we begin behaving differently, living into the new story. The new story becomes an invisible force which pulls us forward. Imagining the future makes it more possible. Yet there is hope because something is happening. There is a coalescence. A different story is rising and ripening. It is a story of who we are as humans, what we are capable of, and how we might work together to reimagine and rebuild our world. It is a story about connection, collaboration, challenge, and joy. So our story is a story of hope, of reappraising now, shifting the perspective so we see the world we are in with new eyes. So one chance left poems for 12 days of COP26, and we still have a chance 12 climate stories for 12 days of COP between the UK and Egypt were born and presented at the diplomatic and public spaces at COP and beyond, reaching over 28 million people worldwide. The poems and stories were co-created between climate scientists, health professionals, artists, educators, storytellers, and youth leaders in the UK and Egypt and beyond. The stories connect the local with the global and are the launchpad for adaptation into different creative outputs. The stories and poems act as a catalyst for climate action and solutions to encourage positive behavior change. The creative outputs include digital and printed books, poetry trails in cities connecting different points, recordings by prominent individuals so the messages can travel far and wide, music on Spotify and Bandcamp inspired by the poems, and film. The attractiveness of our work is demonstrated by the partnerships we have established, as well as the external competitive funding to deliver all these creative outputs. And here's a picture of part of the team with one of our partners in British Council in Egypt. We still have a chance has sparked the creation of large-scale public murals as a legacy for Egypt, and one is in the making for Exeter, and this one was created by Egyptian artist Rana Hemdan and sits in Alexandria, encouraging conversations. The stories open dialogue with the schools, non-traditional communities, and the public who engage through storytelling events in English and Arabic, the creation of artwork inspired by the stories, and conversations with experts and the public on the solutions we can take. We already engage with partners in the UK and UAE in a new project for COP28 through poetry, theatre, music, and education to amplify and encourage new narratives and action. As a Greenpeace scientist has shared with us after watching the Earth turns inspired by the COP27 climate stories. Artists give hope that we can yet make the change needed. Where science hasn't changed minds, art just might. Thank you.
Absolutely incredible. I think this is a really shining example of how quickly a good idea can grow when it speaks to people's hearts. And I think that many of us, and listening to all these stories we've heard so far, you really can feel that we're feeling an emergence of new narratives in this time. So last but certainly not least, we are going to go to Stephen Posner from Garrison Institute. And we're really excited to be collaborating with the Garrison Institute today for this event. And Stephen will talk a little bit about their initiatives in this space. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for being here today, and thanks to all the organizers of this event, especially Susan. This is my first campfire, and I've really enjoyed listening to all of the moving words from everybody and the artwork as well. So thanks for having me. I look forward to hearing from others as well. So I work with the Garrison Institute. I'm the director of Pathways to Planetary Health here. This is a place where deep contemplation and reflection is used to help address today's societal and environmental challenges. So I'm here today calling in from Vermont, where it's a stormy day. So forgive the dark lighting here, but I'm here today to speak about islands of coherence. This is a term that comes from a quote by Ilya Prigogine, who received a Nobel Prize in chemistry. And he said, "When a complex system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift the entire system to a higher order." So small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift the entire system. What does this mean for connected consciousness or planetary health? So drift with me for a moment towards an imaginative place hovering above a sea of chaos. For me, this looks like a vast surface of chaotic and disordered confusion. And within this, there are small pockets of joined upness, discernible areas that make sense, that can inspire clarity. And these are islands of coherence. And in this dynamic, ever-shifting mix, the entire complex system of the sea can shift to become more coherent. So if we apply this to an outer dimension of planetary health, considering economies and what they're for and how they behave, it's easy to see rampant, impractical patterns of consumption and production that just don't make sense. A chaotic market state system untethered by ethical foundations, an age of hyper individuality in the Anthropocene, and all of the associated real and perceived crises. But amidst this sea of chaos, there are pockets of new paradigms in economic thought that can shift an entire system towards a more coherent phase, one that restores balance and regenerates communities and places and promotes well-being as a primary purpose for economies in the first place. Interestingly, when applied to inner development, islands of coherence in a sea of chaos still resonates. In my own experience, I've noticed how amidst the chaos of unsettled or indecisive monkey mind, cravings and attachments, delusions of separateness, there are small islands of clarity, coherent experiences of the present moment. And with contemplative practice, these islands have the capacity to shift the entire inner system towards one of more coherence. So now back to the practical. This metaphor was invoked at a planetary health symposium recently held at the Garrison Institute just a couple months ago. The theme for that gathering was the commons and the common good. And this idea of islands of coherence, I would say it really helped inspire new ideas and collaborations. So I'll wrap up here with just a few reflections that have been percolating since that symposium. Islands in a literal sense are all connected. If we go just below the sea, we can appreciate that diverse and seemingly separate islands are all part of the same thing. They're all the surface of the earth. They come literally from the same source. One island may be covered in ice and tundra, another is a desert, another is a lush tropical rainforest with waterfalls, and they're all from the same source. We also need to go beyond just connecting among islands of coherence, I believe, because connecting can be transactional and transient, right? It can be a fleeting interaction. And I believe we need islands and people on the rest of the planet to enter into and be in reciprocal relationship. Relationship is different than connection in my mind. And this can really be as simple as realizing that islands are all already connected. And it is through the realization, I believe, of enduring relationships among islands of coherence that the entire system can shift from these seemingly isolated and fleeting islands towards coherent balance. So we can create stories and narratives that free our imaginations, which is needed so we can envision a future where we all belong and what it looks like to live in a society that creates the conditions for planetary health. Narratives are important in the ways they bring us into relationship, and they can reveal islands of coherence and show how they join up, and they can invite shifts in entire systems, inner and outer. So from the Pathways to Planetary Health program at the Garrison Institute, I'm really inspired and pleased to be in partnership with the Nova Institute, the Planetary Health Alliance, and others in carrying this constellation project to do the work of cultivating potential for people to share stories and find new narratives. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. And the islands of coherence is such a powerful metaphor, one that is so relevant as we seek to connect our communities of coherence. And we're really grateful to you and Jonathan Rose at the Garrison Institute for your leadership in connecting the contemplative practices to the planetary health agenda. And that brings us to the end of our panel, but I think some of the emerging themes here are really about this sacred reciprocity, this inherent unavoidable connectedness, and that really we are connected, we just have to be aware of it more. So we now invite discussion from everybody. This includes questions for the speakers, comments, ideas, inspirations, and we invite you to put your cameras on, please, if you can, just to promote that sense of community. So go to the top right-hand corner and select gallery view and put your cameras on if you can. And we invite you to put your hands up to speak. And I might begin just by asking the speakers if they have any additional thoughts after seeing each other's talks, or any comments for each other, or questions. And I'm certainly very interested in, with anyone on the call has more comments on how we can accelerate these movements towards promoting awareness and tipping points for change. So I will open the space. Dave, you opened your mic. Does that mean you would like to speak?
Well, I just, yeah, I was just going to make a comment to Stephen, but first of all, this, as I said in the comments, nourishes and enriches my soul in ways that are intangible, metaphysical, and really hard to describe, and the echoes of that follow me for days after. It's very influential, and I really appreciate people coming together like this. I think it's exceptionally necessary. Stephen, you mentioned connections weren't the same as relationships, and I think that you're onto something there, in that the connection is merely the description that you're in close enough contact for some type of interaction to take place. The relationship is really the nature of the interaction. And so it's far more descriptive about what happens. And when you look at it, you get a lot more resolution on how you can make those relationships better. And one tiny layer to add to this is in quantum physics. two things have happened recently. Number one, we were awarded, or the Nobel Prize was awarded for non-locality, which I find is very interesting. It means that, you know, what we see isn't necessarily what is. And then number two is that Gino Rovelli is looking at something called relational quantum mechanics. So it looks like at the very multiple resolutions of science and spirituality, people are looking at relationships or the stories and narratives of how things interact and what the emergent outcomes of those things are. So I think your description of that is in my world is bang on. So thank you for that. That was really meaningful for me.
Thank you, Dave. It's absolutely wonderful. And Stephen, did you have a response to that, or?
Well, yeah, lots of ideas. I don't want to take up too much space. There's so many great people here. Also, I'll just say thank you, David. I appreciate that comment, and I appreciate the mention of quantum mechanics, which is one of my favorite courses that I had in college, and something I return to regularly as a reminder of the ways in which observations of the world can confound us or seem like anomalies in the way that we understand things to be in our daily experience, until we shift our mindsets to be something totally different, so that these anomalies are now actually just an inherent part of the way we understand things to be. Sort of the, you know, shift in scientific paradigms idea. But thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you also, Dave, for the comment you made about the nourishing. Because I think that we want to explore all these different topics, but I think being in community, albeit virtually, would be wonderful to be in person, but is so important, I think, whatever the subject is, because I think there's the building of that underpinning narrative, or whatever we're talking about. Alan.
Yeah, thanks very much. This has been an amazing, I just loved how the presentations just flowed into one another. It was just so seamless, and the theme Rotendo set the stage, you know, right away, was the interconnectedness of all things. And Western science, of course, has done a phenomenal job at breaking things apart and looking at them at the microscale. But Rotendo's message, and just beautifully packaged with everyone else's, is really the consistent theme of the interconnectedness of all things. I just had a quick question for Una, and that was the loving kindness meditation it's a phenomenal area of study, and the mechanisms are not quite understood, that's for sure. But there's really a growing body of research supporting it for multiple aspects of personal health and potentially large-scale health, as your work is underscoring. And I just wanted to ask if you had any more plans to follow up on, you know, your work in this area.
Well, thank you for the question. Yes, we did. We have a number of students who are interested in this, and there could be a PhD later on thesis work on this. So I'm hoping for it. So I think it was very promising, and it was so interesting to see how powerful it can be with such a short intervention. And I think it would be good to try it for a more intense intervention, to see if doing this type of meditation for just a week or even longer, how powerful the effect can be then. So hopefully we will continue these studies.
Thank you. And I think it's so important, you know, that we bridge the science and the evidence with some of these deeper narratives, so that we are able to have a really broad conversation and influence these narratives in a really powerful way. So wonderful to see Dan Siegel on the call. We met at Garrison a few months ago. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this amazing gathering and these presentations from all of the speakers. I just came from a week of doing a retreat with climate activists organized by Cristiana Figueres. And so much of the meditations were deeply about relationality. So what I wanted to ask for any of the speakers or participants, in the journey of being there in the forest, doing the meditations with the Plum Village monastics, one of the experiences that was described was leaving the sense that the self was actually separate, and even going beyond interconnected, and this notion of being within the intra-connected, allowing the self to expand. So what I wanted to really look at is the word self. Is that a word in our various languages we should consider that it's not just the body? So even the term interconnected says the self is here and I'm connected to other things, other people, other species. And could it be that the linguistic use, the story behind self as being the individual, is a part of what's challenging us? So I want to just ask how it feels to think about, rather than interconnected, intra-connected, and whether the self could be seen as both inner and inter, and the wholeness of it all would be the intra-connected sense. And certainly that comes up in metta meditation all the time, that we are deeply embedded in a whole that's, in English at least, we don't have words to describe it. So that's a question for any of the wonderful panelists or anyone to think about that and what your thoughts are. Thank you again for your wonderful work.
Well, I thank you, Dan, and I invite anyone who would like to contribute to answer that question or your reflections on that. But I certainly feel it's that limitations of our language, because there is truly, we need to get to that place of feeling a true unity with all things. And I think that we are learning much from the Indigenous traditions about how we might bring that into our language more. Sonali, did you have your mic open to speak? Please do.
Yeah, I was just thinking of entering the question from the point of some of our sacred text, that's thousands of years old, the Upanishads. And so we actually have words and whole cosmologies for the different selves. So the Atman being the human self on a level, and then the Brahman being that interconnected, but the word doesn't come, it's inseparable nature of the collective selves. And so it is more about feeling our way into it, as Susan was saying, but feeling our way into the reality of the inseparability. And then from that place, so these nurses for Planetary Health are engaging in that process. What is that inseparable nature, the interconnection within nature? From there, how do we look up now? And then see what the forms are that are more in alignment with that at the individual level. So I just offer that, different languages, different cosmologies.
Thank you so much. Dan, did you have would like to say something more? Your hand is still up.
Well, it's so beautiful. Thank you, Sonali. And when people talk about the English language being so noun-filled rather than verb-filled, and then when you realize that these linguistic terms in Western, colonialist language, we have so many nouns of entities that, in a way, when we come to the thing that Stephen was introducing, the quantum view, in the Newtonian world, we have noun-like entities, but in the quantum world, we have really only verbs, only massively connected processes. So a question, Sonali, for you, I would have is, I don't know, certainly in Indigenous traditions, we see this. In the contemplative traditions, this is the question. People were talking about the universal realm of reality versus the historical realm, which seemed to correspond, the universal to the quantum and the historical to the Newtonian. And I'm wondering if that also resonates with your experiences and the languaging to recognize we have these two realms. And if that could become a part of the story, then we could live more like verbs than just noun-like entities separated across space and time.
Yeah, I'll just offer briefly so others can speak too. What I didn't mention in my sharing was this deeper principle we have of Shruti, which is the unchanging principle of radical relationality. It just is, and it is a verb, right? And so as populations and groups coalesce and move into form, that's called smriti, which is moving structure, concepts, norms into some form for the time. And where we see these large inequities and disease and so on and so forth, inequities that we're talking about, are when those two are out of alignment, right? So it is kind of two, but there's a middle. There are all kinds of forms in between. And it's about the action of balance, the actions of reciprocity to bring back into some balance and structure, but all aligned with the rhythm of life and pulse. So does that sort of speak to what you were saying?
Yeah, exactly. And for those who might, in a Western view, want to know the science, we can now have a story which blends the beautiful cultural realities you're speaking of with actually a science that says, and it's been now established, we actually have two realms, kind of like swimming in water or walking on land. No one freaks out saying, oh my God, the properties of water are different than walking on land. And we can make it a story about how we live, and to make sure kids in schools and people in companies and governmental officials realize, how do we live from both realms, And so I think there's a joining of spirituality with science now that can be in the service of moving in the direction we need to go in.
Thank you. And I think some of the limitations of our language in this space is our unfamiliarity, at least in Western cultures, in operating in this space, and why groups like this are so important for normalizing and mainstreaming conversations where we can explore some of these things. I think we have two people who want to speak. We have Atara, who's been waving, I think, and Vanessa. So
thank you, Susan. I just wanted to appreciate this whole forum and everything that you've brought forward here. I feel very moved by all the different presentations that have happened here, and I feel as though you're creating a very kind of alive potential here to take the next step. And I love what Dana was just saying, and Stephen Posner, and I think a few others who were talking about distinguishing between interconnectedness and the radical reciprocity, and I think what Sonali you just said is actually inseparability. I prefer that to interconnected, because then you're prioritizing the unity first. And I think that's a real mind shift, actually. And I think, as Dan was saying, can we shift our sense of self from these individuals to a different concept? And I think it's all in Buddhism and in Hinduism, like that universal self, and you really orienting there. So I just wanted to express my gratitude for what's been shared here. And I feel as though what was brought forward also in the systems thinking that Christine Wamsler was bringing is fantastic, about how the emergence happens through these processes of the relationships, and that changes the whole system. That gives so much hope that our island here of coherence, as Stephen said, linking up with different systems like this really has the potential for huge leverage in terms of changing culture. So I just want to express my gratitude for what's happening.
Absolutely. And I agree very much that we need to start permeating these concepts into so many other conversations as well. Vanessa, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for this space and this movement, so urgent in our times, to achieve what we are aiming to, and that what we are working towards, that is this great transition for this flourishing, loving world and sustainable one. So thank you, all of you, and especially Susan. Yes, it's about this, is this translational or transversal communication between all these fields that we have been building so separately along these years. I'm very happy to see that this is starting to take place you know, with these presentations, lovely presentations that I just saw now. I can see that, you know, these different narratives are emerging in like this mainstream places, like the scientifically truth, or you know, where the knowledge, the knowledge that you can trust are situated, if you know what I mean. So so I'm very happy that this is happening. And I would like to share, especially with the Constellation project family, which I think it's a new egregora that is happening, that you have been going to Ipanema Beach at Rio de Janeiro, because yesterday I was there, and you know, I had the feeling that all of you were there, because was my little time during the day that I'm doing this work, you know, to connect and to go to nature somewhere, just stay for like few minutes. And I was there feeling that thing that I know every which one of you knows what I'm talking about, when you are part of the whole and you are one with the planet. You were there with me. It was amazing. I felt that very strongly. So I would like to share that I think that this is a very important, and we have no idea about the importance of this movement that we are creating now. I think this is very powerful, and it's very urgent that we, as I said, like contaminate people to join in the boat and go with us. You know, it's what is missing actually, is this in the world. We have all the data, all the knowledge, we have everything in our clicks, you know. This is what is missing, this humanity and this family feeling of this egregor. Thank you so much. And I will need to leave a little bit early, so I excuse myself, but I'm very happy because this is my first campfire too, as a friend just said. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, as always. Peter, welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'm Peter Wayne from Boston Harvard Medical School. Just so grateful for this gathering, and actually emotionally and intellectually overwhelmed. It's just touches so many rich feelings for me and ideas. A couple quick comments. I really appreciated Sam Meyer's comment about the unusualness and awkwardness of bringing these heart-based and spiritual-based issues into academic environments, but how essential it is. And I want to share that I was at the inaugural event here at the Harvard School of Public Health for the Thich Nhat Hanh Center for the Center for Mindfulness and Public Health, and to hear the deans and the deans of deans all say the future of public health requires this contemplative, mindful, spiritual perspective, that without that, there's no hope. And to bow in reverence to the contemplatives there as partners in this, that was just a moment in the most traditional Harvard Medical School auditorium filled with people. So that was fantastic and hopeful. I also love this discussion about reductionism and holism, and the irony is the deeper we go into smaller and smaller pieces, the more we realize how everything is interconnected. So we can't get away from it, and you know, they're all connected. And then just to add to the other wisdom traditions that have different concepts and languages for self, but in the East Asian and Taoist perspectives, there are many bodies, and there are this whole idea of microcosm and macrocosm. And so I think in many of these wisdom traditions, we can find languages and frameworks that really do support this way of communicating very rich but tricky issues. So, but mostly thank you to all of you. It's just so moving and touching and wonderful.
Thank you, Peter. And it's very heartening to hear about those recent experiences. Cecilia.
Yeah, thank you all. I'd just like to echo what has been said and shared. And I know the messages and conversations will stay with us for weeks to come. I'm really interested to see what's next as a community, because we are a privileged community to have a privileged space to share and experiences, but we're running out of time. And we need to mobilize people. We need to bring people on board. We need to really cross boundaries, communicate across languages, and be very creative and inclusive. So I just want to throw this challenge to this community. I'm sure you're all doing extraordinary work where you are in different ways as an individual, as part of a community, as part of your professions. But there is that sense of urgency as well. And I just like us to challenge us all, as we have an opportunity to tell a different story here. This is a citizen story, I feel, and we have an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. That's such an important challenge. And from all of these challenges, there will be opportunities. And I think through these connections, we will find more opportunities and ideas, and people like you who are doing incredible work will provide wonderful insight and examples for us to follow. Now, we are coming right up to time now, and when I will officially close the meeting, but if there are some pressing discussions that you would like to continue for a few moments afterwards, that is also fine. You're welcome to stay. But many will need to go, so I just want to thank our speakers, Rutendo, Una, Christine, Sonali, Cecilia, Stephen, Sam, and although Terry didn't speak, she's here. And to all of those of you who added your comments and the enthusiasm and love and spirit that you are bringing to this. I want to again thank the PHA and the Garrison Institute for joining us in this initiative, and Lachlan at CorpCom. It's right in the middle of the night in Melbourne, and he's taking wonderful care of us with all of this technical support. The conversation, of course, does not end here, and we invite you to continue this specific discussion on the Hub, and Dawn and Erin will post that link again in the chat, so you can add your thoughts and reflections there. We even have a group on consciousness conversations, which is a great way to continue this conversation. We're also hoping to have our next campfire on September 20, and that will hopefully be about something continuing models and mindsets for restorative and regenerative practices, but focusing this time on businesses, thinking about finance, economics and marketing, and how we must influence those mindsets as well. So we'll let you know more about that in due course, but we do invite you to join the Nova Network at a link that we'll put in the chat, please, so that we can reach out to you with more information if you're not on our mailing list. Now, for those who wish to stay behind for a few moments and have been waiting to speak and say some final words, we welcome you to do that. But for everyone else, we thank you once again, and we're really, really grateful that you've brought your energy and your thoughts and your love into this space for us. And as I think has been said already,